All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our short session on taking your articulate storyline skills to the next level. It's so good to see so many of you here. It's great for you to join us. Basically, for the next 30 to 40 minutes, it's just an opportunity for us to have a look at some examples of some other ways that you could use articulate storyline and really kind of dig deeper into what you can make storyline do for you. Ways that you can really push it beyond the outer barriers and make all sorts of cool stuff kind of happen. So it's great to see you. Lots of returning people who I've seen before, so welcome back for those that are returning. And those that are brand new, welcome to our webinar. My name is Matt Blackstock. I'm the Learning Manager here at Be Online Learning. And Be Online Learning, in a very, very short nutshell, we are the certified articulate training partner for Australia and New Zealand. We also develop within the articulate suite of products quite considerably using Storyline or Rise or whatever the case may be. Replay, review, you name it, we can pretty much help out with it. We also have our own learning management system called Birch, which we're very proud of, and is a great way that you can manage not only your face-to-face learning, but also your online-based learning, your self-directed e-learning, and even your on-the-job assessment. Okay, so a little bit of housekeeping before we get underway. If you've got any questions or thoughts or ideas during today's session, I would really encourage you to, if it's a question, throw it in the Q&A panel, which you'll locate down the bottom of your screen. Let me just stick a picture up so you'll see where it is. So that's down the bottom here. So if there's a key question you want to ask how we did something, or if you're just curious about something you see on the screen, throw that in there. I'll answer that as part of the session as well as I can. And if I don't get to it during the session, I will definitely try and get it during our wind up at the end of the session today as well. And you've also got access to the chat. So if you want to talk to anyone or catch base with anyone, please, I would encourage you to use the chat. Any bits of inspiration or thought that you think of. The only thing I'll get you to do is you'll see that there's a little drop down gray window here, which currently will say something like all hosts and panelists. If I can just get you to change that to everyone, that'd be really, really good. Because if you change it to everyone, what that means is it means that everyone will be able to see your comments, your ideas. And also, if you throw a question in the chat and not the Q&A, don't panic. We'll still get a chance to answer it from there as well. So today's session is really about looking at what else we can do with Storyline. Being the certified training partner through Australia and New Zealand, as I mentioned, we have a lot of people that do the basic articulate training course and also the advanced training course with us. And they kind of do that and they get out there and they start using Storyline for a while. And they get really excited and they say, look, what else is there? Is there any other training or is there any other program I can look at just to help me kind of get an even more thorough understanding of Storyline itself? And we tend to say, well, there is another program you can do, and I'll talk about that at the end of the session. But what we do try and do is we try and have these free webinars to share some ideas with you and kind of give you a bit of a top level look at how those ideas are brought together. And also we try and put together some up-to-date exercises and activities that we share with you guys as well, just to see some of the latest tools as they come into the Articulate suite of products. And also as we create things for our clients or our customers, we also try and share good stuff that we like the look of or we think other people could really benefit from as well. So we will kind of go through that today. I did get one question come in saying, is a recording this session going to be available after the session? Yep, should be. I am recording it, so we will be sending that recording out to you afterwards so you can have a bit of a look at those ideas we look at and a bit of a play with that as well. So without any further ado, we've only got a limited amount of time together. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to turn my camera off so you don't have my head bobbing up in the corner and being really, really distracting. But of course, you still have my dulcet tones to accompany you as we go through our tour of other things you can do with Storyline as well. And again, don't forget, guys, pop any questions in the Q&A and any other observations or ideas in the chat. So first up, anytime you want to kind of do more with Storyline, I always encourage people to come back to the basics. Always remember that there are 4 key building blocks that make up everything you do within Storyline. There's what we have our slides, which is where we spend most of our time. That's where our timeline is. And that's where we add our pictures and our videos and our audio and so forth. We then have states as well. And states is just simply what something looks like. You know, if it's a character, it might be the character's in a happy state or a happy look, or it might be in a sad or a disappointed look or a disappointed state. You could also have things like buttons. So if you've got a button that's blue, once the learner hovers over that, it might change to red. as a hover state, so people know that it's a dynamic button, that it's active, that it does something. And when the learner moves their mouse back off that button, it changes back to its original color. And you can change the state of all sorts of things, not only characters and colors, but items, shapes, or even photos and images as well. And states is really all about making stuff look a little bit different. It's not creating multiple items. It's the same item, but it just looks different based on what the learner is doing or what you as the developer want the states to display or show. That brings us into the third building block, which is layers. So layers is all about kind of bringing more information to the slide the learner is on without actually leaving them from the slide or having them leave the slide to go elsewhere. The great analogy that I tend to share with learners is that think of a layer as a sheet of glass that you can lay over the top of your base layer or your slide. And on that sheet of glass, you can bring in extra information or videos or audios or whatever the case may be. And the great thing about layers is you can have them show or hide based also on what the learner's doing or also what you're trying to communicate with the learner. And of course, most importantly, that last building block, that trigger building block, if you ever want some sort of action to occur or something to change, you've got to trigger it. Okay, so that's the key things that everything we look at today comes back to. And really the best way to get your head around storyline is really dive deep into these four building blocks. Push them as far as you can go and see what's possible with them. Because once you kind of get really comfortable with them, you can bring them all together in all sorts of different ways to create all sorts of effects. For those that have done training with me previously, I say this all the time, the only limitation on what you want to achieve in storyline is your own imagination. If you can dream it, you can pretty much build it. Okay. Now, of course, once you build those items, you've got these building blocks in play, to make stuff happen, you'll probably be spending a lot of time focusing on triggers, making sure stuff happens in the correct order that you want it to happen when the learner is actually interacting with your learning. And that's probably the next really important thing I want to kind of stress is whenever you're creating triggers and when you're getting these more advanced features, you'll find that single items have multiple triggers coming off them based on what order you want things to occur in and also what the learner is doing as well. So you really need to take a moment to kind of pause and think, okay, when I add these triggers, what has to happen first? Then what's happened next? And then what happens after that and so on. And making sure that stuff is happening in the right order because trigger order is extremely important. One trigger out of order could actually blow up your interaction that you're trying to create. It just may not behave the way you want it to behave. So if you have a look at that picture on the left-hand side, this is a trigger panel from a gamification, which is a roll of a dice. So when the learner clicks the dice, all right, which is called roll the dice, that's the name of the actual picture of the dice, you can see that we've got 2, 4, 6, 8 different things happening once that occurs. So the minute we click it, it's going to play an audio file. Then it's setting a variable to 0. Then it's setting a dice variable to a random number between 1 and 6. And then it's also setting a second dice variable to a random number between 1 and 6 as well. Now, don't worry about why I've done this way. I'm going to show you the actual project this comes from, but I just want to make it really, really obvious why I've done it in this particular order. Then once dice 1 and dice 2 are set to a random number between 1 and 6, it's then adding both of those values to another number variable. And that number variable is going to be used to move a token or a rocket ship, in this case, around a game board. All right. And then once we get down the bottom, there's actually a little state change happening, which is kind of saying, yeah, once the learner has read the instructions of what they need to do, then we can hide that as well. Now, if any of these were out of order, this interaction wouldn't work. So for example, if I was getting a random number between 1 and 6 and then adding it to total roll, if I've been using this trigger a couple of times, total roll may already have a value connected to it. So what's going to happen is I'm going to artificially inflate my number. That's why I've got this set it back to 0 at the beginning. So what's happening is, what this is really simulating is a roll of 2 6-sided dice. So I'm rolling those 2 6-sided dice, adding them together, and then using that number to move a little rocket ship around the game board. Now, if you ever want to kind of get a closer look at your trigger order to make sure it makes sense, There's a great tool in Storyline 360, which is called your group triggers, which is this little guy over here. And when you click on that, it actually makes this much, much easier to read, because we can see that when the user clicks roll the dice, step one's going to happen, then two, then three, then four, five, six, seven, and eight. It doesn't kind of get lost in all the various bits and triggers on the left-hand side here. So this is really, really handy if you need to check what's firing in what order. And if you need to rearrange items, you can select a trigger and use your up and down arrows to move them up and down. Okay. So that's the key thing I also want to point out, understanding the building blocks and also remembering that when you're putting multiple triggers to an item, it's really important to think through what trigger needs to fire first, then second, then third, then fourth. And we'll see this in a moment when I get to the little demo as well. So that's kind of the technical stuff. And what I want to do for the rest of this session is I want to share with you some examples. And these examples kind of take into play these four kind of advanced skill sets. So a couple of building block tricks, so using multiple states plus also triggers to achieve a particular outcome. Remembering animations and transitions, a lot of people kind of steer away from them because, you know, too many animations can be really, really distracting for the learner. And also it gets a little bit repetitive and a little bit tiresome if you've got stuff pinging and you know, pinging around all over the place. So a lot of the time people might steer away from animations and transitions, but used cleverly, you can actually create some very nice smooth effects with them as well. We're also going to look at some motion paths. So motion paths in general, if you've done any training with us before, motion paths are to get items from one section on your screen to another section on the screen. But you can also use them for so much more. You know, you can actually use them for learner triggered motion. So maybe the learner has to do something and move something in response to what's happening on the screen. And that could be anything from them clicking a button on the keyboard, or even to them answering a question correctly, or so on and so forth. And the other kind of advanced skills is when you really dig into variables, you can create all sorts of different effects. Now, if you're not comfortable with any of these items at the moment, don't panic or stress. Really, it comes down to just playing with stuff as you go along. And I really want to kind of point out to you too, these advanced skills, they're very involved. They might have a lot of triggers in them. And you might go, that's fantastic. I want to use that in my next training course. But just because you can build it doesn't necessarily mean you always have to use it. All right. Often we might fall into the habit as developers, we like cool new stuff and we might over-engineer stuff. Whereas for the learner, a much simpler interaction might have achieved the same outcome. There's an old saying, which is called, is the juice worth the squeeze? Now, it's not my saying. It's a saying that I've picked up over the years from a couple of people. But it's about going, you know, you could sit here and create this really, really intricate, engineered multiple trigger interaction, which addresses a particular learning gap. And the learner might go, wow, that was fantastic. It had bells, it had whistles, it had sound. But when someone actually asks the learner after the training course, well, what did you actually learn from that? They might go, oh, well, I don't know, but it was so cool. Some really cool stuff in there. So we could have achieved a better learning outcome by maybe using a simpler effect. So the one thing, whenever you're trying to get into these more advanced effects, always think, just because you can do it, do you have to? Now, that doesn't mean that you don't ever do them. You can create some very, very nice little learning experiences in the case when you do use them, but also sometimes the simpler interaction might be better off. All right, so let's have a look at some examples. So the way I want to approach the session is I want to show you an example, kind of give you a feel for what it looks like from the learner's point of view, then kind of go under the hood and show you how we achieve that. All right, so I'm going to share with you 6 kind of courses or 6 things that have been created within Storyline itself. There's a course that we created for a client of ours on the Modern Slavery Act, and it's got some nice little video-like effects in it. So the great thing about that is if you don't have a huge budget to delve into something like video, you can still achieve some really nice effects within Storyline itself, okay, by using animations and also timing. So we're going to have a look at that using a bit of motion graphics, some layers, shapes, and motion paths. Then we're going to look at another course we did for an organization on records management. And it's about this idea that a lot of the time we like to use a bit of scenario-based e-learning in our training, where the learner gets presented with a problem or a set of things they need to address or solve, and they need to make a choice to solve that problem. And whatever choice they make, there is a consequence for it. So they choose choice A, they'll end up on consequence A, choice B, consequence B, etc. So this one is actually, again, if you haven't got that huge budget to create like video recorded scenarios or actual like, interactions between people recorded on a video camera or something similar, you can also add a level of dynamics to your scenarios within Storyline as well, just again by using animations, few state changes, and having a play with the effects as well. Then we'll look at a one called Think Before You Click, which is a very, very simple training module about information security. And all it uses is text, icons, and transitions. And that kind of gives a nice little smooth effect as each slide transitions to the next slide. So I'll give you a look at that one. And it's a really simple one to replicate as well, which is good. Lifelong learning takes it to the next level. And lifelong learning, it's a little module. It's just kind of like a little demo module about how we learn. And it really combines a lot of the concepts from those first three activities into a single activity so you can see how it uses. And it really concentrates on using motion graphics, layers, shapes, and motion paths to create a particular outcome. And then the last two examples I'll share with you, they're both gamification examples. One, Inner City Rides, is a passenger vehicle road safety e-learning module, and it brings in a whole heap of multiple states and motion paths, and also starts playing with lesser known intersection triggers, which are available to you via your triggers within Storyline. So we'll have a look at what they're all about, and also revisited light boxes and other ways you can use light boxes. The final one I'll share with you is called Our Great Space Race. It's a gamified example of some space learning, and it uses a whole bunch of random number variables, conditions, light boxes, states, and also button sets. And then we'll probably have about 5 minutes up our sleeve at the end. So if anyone's got any questions or thoughts or queries, more than happy to answer those from there as well. But without any further ado, let's get out of death by PowerPoint. Let's pop across to our first demo. And let's have a look at what this one's all about. So our first example, as I said, was the example on our modern slavery legislation. And this was, we did this for one of our clients. It was kind of using motion paths to bring some movement to predominantly the title slides and also the section headers. So I'll bring this guy up here. You guys should be able to see it. Now, it might be a little bit stop-starty on your screens. That'll be because of the latency and zoom. But this actual effect is really quite smooth when you look at it. Now, there's no video here. This is just taking an image and using a motion path to move it from one side of the slide across to the other. So I'll just refresh that so you can have another look at it. So what we've got is we've got a really nice high resolution image in the background, and it's moving from the right-hand side across to the left-hand side. It's a very subtle effect, but it kind of gives you the idea that someone's got a video camera and they're panning from the left to right across an image. This works really well with like high resolution detail images like this. It also works well with big landscape images. So, a picture of maybe Sydney Harbour or a picture from the lookout at your local town or whatever the case may be. Now, the effect is a very, very simple effect. I'm going to pop over to my monster demo slide here so you can see how it's all put together. So this is it here. And all I've got is, and I'm going to come out a little bit so you can see. I got a question in the chat, which is a really good question. What's the size of the image? It is a bit of a monster image, Daniel. So what I've done is I've actually gotten, I think it was around about 5,000-ish by something. So it is very high resolution. But I've only cut it down to what I need it to be. And you can play with that resolution as you go through it to get a nice balance between size on your actual module and also the size of the image. So you can see what I've done here is the slide finishes here, right? That's where the slide finishes. But this picture is kind of like a long landscapey type picture. And what I've got is, all I've done is I've just popped a motion path on it. So you can see there's the motion path there. And what's happening is when the learner comes to this slide, the motion path is going to start. I've actually stretched the duration of the motion path out to a good 15 seconds. So it kind of gives that really nice slow zoom from left to right, or sorry, pan from left to right as the learner comes across. So really nice high size image. Motion path, fairly slow. Okay, so it kind of takes its time getting across there. You might also need to tweak the length of the motion path because you kind of want this eyeball here to end up not going off the screen. We don't want it to go so far that it actually comes off the screen and you can see a big white gap of the slide below it. But we want to kind of make sure we tweak it so that the edge of the photo ends at the edge of the actual slide itself. And again, that gives us that really nice smooth effect where the motion path gets triggered the minute the learner hits the slide. And away it goes. Now you could use this for a title page or even section headers as you go through the actual module as well. So quite a nice little one that you can play with. Now this takes that concept of using motion paths to move things around to the next level. So this is a click and reveal interaction. Now, normally you would click on a tile and it would open up a layer and show you some information. But what I've done here is when the learner clicks on a tile, rather than just open up the layer and show them the information, I've actually used some animations to move the downtown tile to the left-hand side, get rid of the uptown and old town tiles, and then animate in from the right-hand side the actual content. So I'll just click on that and show you what I mean. So see how everything moves to its new position? All right. So everything moves out, tile we're on moves to its new position, and then in comes our content. And then when we click our close button, rather than just hiding the layer straight off the bat, everything transitions back out. So our content moves back out to the right, our downtown goes back to its starting position, and our uptown and old town buttons come back into play. And this works no matter which button you press. Okay. So this is a really nice thing you can start playing with. You know, you can create your own transitions from set A to set B without just being like a ping it's open or ping it closes, as the case may be. You can kind of animate everything in and animate it back out again as you go through it. Now, again, this is a bit more of an involved process because what's happening is when the learner clicks one of these buttons, all of the movements actually occurring on the corresponding layer. And if I bring up my timeline, you can see what's happening here. We've got both of these uptown and old town tabs, they're animating out. The downtown tab, which is this blue one here, it's moving via a motion path to its new position. And then once it's in its new position, the content, which is at the back here. All right, so I close those guys, so I'll get them out of the way. It's moving into position. And then what's happening is we're actually pausing the timeline on that layer. So everything's moving in. And once it's in position, which is the 3-second mark, everything's going to pause. So the timeline, we've used a pause timeline trigger to stop that. And what that does, that gives the learner plenty of times to read through the content, get a good feel for it. And then once they hit the close button, you can see that the trigger connected to the close button is not hide this layer, it's actually resume the timeline on this layer. And then you can see from the 3-second mark onwards, we've got the button fading out, we've got our content moving back out to the right-hand side. We've also got our downtown tab is now moving back to its starting position. So you can see if I zoom in here a little bit, we've actually got 2 motion paths connected to that, one to the left, one to the right. And we've used a relative start point to make sure it moves back to its starting position. And then I've got the copies of the old town and uptown tabs, they're just animating back in normally. So they're just flying back in from the right-hand side. So originally we've got one copy flying out. We've got our downtown tab moving to its new position. Our content and buttons are animating in. Then the timeline pauses. Then when we resume the timeline, our button animates out, our content animates out, our motion path moves our downtown tab back to its starting position, and then a copy of the old town and uptown tabs animate back in from the right-hand side. So yeah, there's multiple versions of different things there, but as long as you align them properly, the learner never actually realizes that they've left the layer, or they're looking at multiple versions of the same item. It gives a really nice transitional effect. And then resume. Back we go. Okay. So really nice little effect using motion paths and triggers and just tricking the learner. Like nothing's happening on the base layer. All these are triggers. All the movements happening on each of the individual layers. And then once the layers have completed, we've got them automatically closing to return back to the base layer as well. Okay. Then we've got this guy. So again, this is coming back to that idea of if you don't have a huge budget to record a video-based scenario, you can do a very good case with just the animated assets that are available as part of Storyline. So this is just a stock standard scenario. I'm going to play it so you can have a look at it in a moment. And what I've done is I've just used different expressions on the key characters to give them a bit of life. So what I've done is I've thought if this was a video scenario, what would the characters be looking like? When would they be smiling in? When would they be answering a phone? When would they be typing? When would they be thinking? And I've just kind of gone through and gone, okay, let's create either states or additional objects to take up to show that view. And then by changing the expression or the pose on my characters, it's just giving them a little bit more life rather than being a cutout figure stuck to the page. So let's preview this one very, very briefly so you can give you an idea of what we're talking about. During a natural disaster, Lily was to attend to resident requests received via post, email, phone, Facebook, and SMS messages. Lily captured the requests that came through the post and email into an approved business application. However, she didn't know what to do with the phone, Facebook, and SMS messages. She just verbally updated her manager about those items. So you can see what we've done with it is we've just kind of gone, okay, let's add, in this instance, I'll come down to my timeline. Let's add multiple versions of our Lily, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and just time it with the audio to change the expression or change what she's doing based on what the audio is saying. So that just kind of gives a little bit more life to a cutout character rather than it just standing there until the end of the actual slide. I've also kind of taken a page out of this book. So, with the Clayton Newts where we move the picture from one side to the other, I've done the same thing with my scenario here as well. So if I zoom out, you can see that I've actually got not that far. So Storyline's being a little bit slow because I've got so much stuff open at the moment and it's just misbehaving. There we are. Let's just zoom out a bit more. So you can see I've done the same thing. I've got a big background image. This one's just a graphic image. Now this image I've just gotten off Shutterstock, or iStock Photo. I've just purchased it. I've laid it slightly off the slide, the same as that title slide. And then even though I've got my Lily changing her expression as they move through, once they get to a trigger point on here, so at the 22.25 second mark, I'm actually actioning that motion path to move the background. And it's really just to give the idea that Lily in the magenta top has moved to another section of the office to give a debrief to her boss. So again, it's just creating a little bit more interest on what's happening in the background as well. All right, let's minimize that for a sec. Let's come back here. And I want to show you another example. Here we go. This is what I call the think before you click. This is an information security module. And again, I've just used some very, very basics to create the image. So with this, I haven't focused a lot on pictures. It's just been on icons and text. And I'm going to use transitions just to transition from one slide to the other. But I'm going to do it in such a way that it looks like everything is moving on the slide. It kind of gives that video effect again as well. So let me get started on this guy. And the key way to kind of sell this is, you see that white arrow that is shot in across the bottom? All right, this is a single slide, and I've got a trigger attached to that arrow. And when I click on it, the transition pushes this next slide across. And because I've got the remnants of the arrow on the second slide, and all I've done is duplicated it, moved it to the new position, and then made sure it's in alignment, it kind of gives the impression that I'm just moving around the one chart, okay, rather than having multiple different slides. And each time I click on an arrow, it moves me to the next section. Okay? So if I click on this arrow, now all that is, as I said, that's just a transition from this slide to the other slide as a push-up transition. So these aren't so much animations, but there are ways that you can transition from one slide to the other. And again, when you kind of set up these items that simulate as if they're appearing over one slide to another, it gives the impression that it's just moving around one large poster image. So it's kind of zoomed in and just moving around that image. So across we go. Again, you can bring into some stock standard animation, have a play with as well. And it just follows that same effect. We've got the arrow animating in, and then what's happening is the slide is pushing it back out. So to kind of see what that looks like within Storyline itself, here's the first slide. So I've got the arrow. This arrow's got an animation on it. So it's flying in from the left-hand side. So when we look at this, this will fly in. But what I've done is when I've created this second slide, I've duplicated the arrow and I've just moved it over to the left-hand side. I've made sure it's kind of on the same plane, moved over to the left-hand side. And then all I've done is I've added a transition, a push transition, to push this slide from the right-hand side. So it's going to give the impression that's actually pushing on that first one. So again, if I just highlight both of those two slides there and give you a quick little preview of the selected slides. There's our first slide. The arrow animates in from the left-hand side. And when I click on it, it's just a standard jump to next slide trigger. So I go jump to next slide, and there you go. Because it's now pushing it across and that arrow's in the same position, it kind of sells the effect that it's the one image. All right. So transitions are probably a lesser known thing often within Storyline. It's not something people kind of get wrapped up on animations or get focused on animations. So they won't necessarily know or play with the transitions as well. Now, the great thing about all that is that you can combine all of those concepts of motion paths and triggers into a single motion graphic based Storyline project. So this is all built within Storyline itself, using animations, transitions, and also motion paths to move items across and around as well. So again, the idea behind it is rather than just having stock standard images appearing on the screen, we're actually making sure we're animating or transitioning from one image to the next. And that's the important thing to kind of sell these effects. You've got to kind of sit there and go, all right, where's my starting position? Okay, so in this particular situation, if I pop over to my big demo file, let's pop this back up. What I've done is I've collected all of the images I want to create. So there's my L plate. There's my computer monitor with the flower. There's my phone with the text discussion. And there's my coffee cup. And then I've just sat there and gone, okay, how do I get from this picture to this picture using animations and layers and maybe some additional shapes and so forth? And probably the easiest way to see how I've done that, because let's have a look here. Come down to my coffee mug. You can see that I've got a very bold colored background, and then I've brought in different shapes just to cover up bits and pieces. So with this coffee mug, I wanted a tapered bottom, not just a box. So by bringing in two little trapezoids, I can kind of make them the same color as the background and trick the eye into thinking, oh, okay, yeah. So I can see that that's now got the taper in it. And that's really all it is. You know, I've also got a bottom little rectangle here. So if I hide everything, I'll get rid of the lid. So that white square, that was actually the white background of the phone. So I've just kind of worked out, what do I need to get rid of? And then what do I need to add to create the effect I'm after? So if we go back to the actual transition itself, so this is that actual slide. I'm going to go from the phone, or actually we can go from the PC. So if I play out the PC, you can see that I've just animated items to pop in as I want them to. You can actually see the one down at the bottom. So I've drawn my image and then I've just pulled in shapes where I've wanted shapes to be. Okay, and created the items and animated them separately if I've needed to. Now this of course works best with a nice bold background, because then you can bring in blockers and covers like this to kind of play with it to get the effect you're after. And really it just comes down to working out your transitions, your animations, and what motion paths to get that effect that you want. So we just preview the single slide. Each of our pictures are on an additional layer. And then all we had to do was kind of step through, all right, how do I get from my L to my monitor? And it's just picking one shape and then kind of building on that shape using animations to build it out and change it and make it a little bit different. And you might need to bring in your blockers like I showed you, but it's just a nice way that you can kind of like create a nice little animation without having to put money into like video or an actual designer or a graphic designer or whatever the case may be. Yeah, so Tara, the main thing is it does kind of, it kind of simulates the effect. It is a little bit time intensive, I'll be completely honest with you, because you've got to kind of sit down and go, okay, how do I make this happen? But really, the best rule of thumb is just your photos you want, create the original image you're after. So I know I'm going from an L plate to a monitor. So what can I grab from here to expand out to start creating this? And you really only need one item. So all I've done is that back end of the L, I've kept that, and then I've built the rest of this around it. And the same with the phone. You know, I've just looked at it and gone, okay, I just need to keep the black again, and then build the other items around it. So a little bit time intensive, but you can certainly create some fantastic effects with it. All right. Now to finish up today, I wanted to share with you two kind of gamification examples. All right. Again, we've kind of seen the projects here and kind of had a bit of a high level view of how it's created. So you would probably have to be a bit of a play with it. But this is another great one that I really, really like. This is one that uses motion paths to move a car around the screen. And then if the car runs into anything, it opens a layer to either tell the learner, hey, hang on a sec, be careful how you're driving, or it prompts them with a safety question. You know, what should you do if this happens? So I'm going to hit play. There's my road. And what I'm doing is I'm actually pressing the arrow keys on my keyboard to steer my car around the screen. Now, if I run off the road, a layer comes up and says, whoa, hang on, get back on the road. There's also obstacles. So there was a rock on the road. And if I intersect with that rock, that's actually going to set off a trigger that will present me with a light boxed question. So what should you do if there is an object on the road or an obstacle? And then as the learner, I need to make a decision. So yes, I'm going to do that. Submit. It'll tell me whether I'm correct or incorrect. And then it will return me to the actual road where I can keep driving. If I drive on the wrong side of the road, it says, oi, get out of the oncoming traffic. And if I drive too fast, it also tells me to take it easy on the accelerator. Okay. So again, I'm doing all this movement via my keyboard keys. And then if something comes on the road and I accidentally run into it, there's an object intersection trigger firing in the background, which is then showing me a light boxed question about, hey, think about it. What do you do if an animal runs out in front of your vehicle? What should you be doing? And then again, so this is where your learning kind of comes into play. The learner goes, oh, well, I should have done that. Yes, she should have. So it's kind of getting them a chance to test their safety knowledge. and also reinforcing whether they're getting it right or wrong. Now that dog just jumped over the top of my car and was safe, so that's good to know. And then you might have something like this. Okay, that's a police car. All right, let's put his lights on. So I'm just going to get over to the left-hand side so I can make him go past. If I run into the police car, it will again trigger a question, a safety question on what I should do if a police car approaches me from behind with its lights on. And again, it gives me an opportunity to go, oh, I should have done that, as the case may be. All right, just going to reverse, slow down a bit and come back down my road. And there you go. So this is all managed via motion paths. All right? So if we have a look at the actual project file, we've got our center line. So there's a few triggers involved, but once you kind of think them through, we've got our center line. It's moving on a motion path directly down. That's what's kind of giving the impression that the road is moving, the car's moving along the road. I've got, let's just zoom in a bit. I've got 3 hotspots. I've got one on the left-hand side if I run off the road. I've got one at the top corner if I go too far ahead, not giving myself enough time to see any obstacles appearing. I've also got one on the right-hand side, which is also I cross the road into oncoming traffic. And then all I've got is I've got some triggers here. As I said, these are called object intersect triggers, which are saying, all right, what do I want to do? Well, I want to show the layer you're on the wrong side of the road when an object intersects with the target object. So what's the object? Well, it's my car. And when it intersects with the wrong side hotspot. So when I run over onto this hotspot, it's going to automatically show me the wrong side of the road layer. And then on the wrong side of the road layer, it goes for 5 seconds. It's going to automatically close. So I've set up the slide properties so that it automatically closes once those 5 seconds have elapsed. And I've also just put a little kind of move trigger on the motion path just to kind of nudge the car back on the road. So if the learner goes too far over one side, then basically they can just nudge it back over there. Great question that came up in the chat. If the learner avoids all the obstacles, then none of the questions will be presented. That's correct. All right. That's why if with the actual project itself, what you've got is you'd have a message or something saying, well done, if they haven't intersected with anything. So I'll just come down here because this shows me the obstacles they've encountered. So this message comes up, well done, and then they can click on that and that'll then take them through the 3 questions anyway, just to make sure they've got the right information. So if they avoid a problem, they won't get presented the question originally, but at the end of the experience, the learning experience, that question they avoided will get presented to them just as a reminder or a reinforcement. Okay, so hopefully that answers your question, Sahani. Yeah, they will avoid them on the game part, but they'll get all the questions presented to them or the ones that they didn't encounter at the end once they've completed the project. And then my car, my police car, my dog, and my rocks, they're just all on their own motion paths, which are triggered when they appear on the timeline. So they'll just start happily moving away. And I've also got triggers set up that if my car intersects with any of those other items, it'll also then show them the light boxed slide or question that relates to that particular item my car has run into. And just on the car, you can see what I've got is it's got 4 motion paths on it. I'll just zoom in so it's a bit easier to see. I've got an up, left, down, and right. They're all relevant motion paths. Now, what relevant motion path means that no matter where that block ends up on the screen, it'll move from that position, that new position. It won't jump back to the original starting position and then move from there. So that's what the relevant starting point's all about. All right. So again, a bit of fun. You can bring something in where the learner can control what they're after as it moves around the screen, and they can go from there. All right, final example. This was the big gamification example I mentioned at the beginning, which is my great space race. So this is a gamified learning module. It's all about learning all about space. Here we go. So there's my game board. And up here, I've got some dice. And when I click on those dice, it rolls each of the dice. It gets a random number between 1 and 6 for both dices, for dice 1 and dice 2. It adds them both together. So it goes 3 plus 2 is 5. Then it moves my little blue rocket ship here 5 spaces from the starting position. So we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I've started my journey on the great space race. So each time I click on those dice, it's going to roll up another random number. So 6 and 9. And it's going to move my blue rocket that many spaces. So he was on the 5 space. So 5 and 9 is 14. So now he's on the 14 space. And again, that's just calculation triggers happening under the hood via a number variable to move my blue rocket so many spaces. Let's click it again. So 2. So again, it's gone from 14 to 16. The idea being that as I go around, and I'm actually probably these red spaces, these guys are questions. Now, I've actually avoided all the questions, so that's no good, but I will get hit with one at the end. So if I'd landed on any of those red squares, I get this layer pops up that says you've got to draw a card and answer it correctly. And then when I click on the deck, it draws randomly from 6 cards that I've got in the system. So this one's about Voyager 1 and Voyager 2. And then I have to read through the question, make a choice on what the answer is. So in this case, it's the golden record. And then it pops back straight away and says, yep, that's correct. And then in this case, because I avoided all the other questions, it got me right to the end, which is probably not a good thing. Let's see if I can reset that and see if we can get another question a bit better. Of course, I'm doing this live, so of course it's not going to let me do that. Excellent. I've got a different question though. That's good. All right. So I could sit here trying to click that all day, but I'm aware of the time, so we do need to finish up. But what I want to show with this is how you can combine a bunch of number-based variables to create a particular effect. So by rolling the dice, you can get some random numbers, add those together, and then move your little blue rocket ship along the relevant spaces as well. Up in the corner here, I've got a little variable light box. Now, this is only for me as the developer. This allows me, this is a good kind of handy hint. If you've got a lot of variables in a project that you need to keep track of, this is a good way that you can do that. You can create a separate slide, add the information on what the variables are set to. So these are all variable references. And then at any time throughout the module when you're testing it, you can click on the variables tab and it will bring you in here and you can see what items are currently set to. So I see I can roll a 6 and a 4. Together they added 10. So it's a good way that you can fine tune and troubleshoot any calculations that you have, okay? So, and also Ella's asked a great question. Will you get the same question twice in a row? And the answer is no. What I've got is I've got a true or false variable connected to each of those questions. So the very first time that question is presented to the learner, that true or false variable will change from false to true, which means that when the learner clicks a card to view another question, Storyline First Up will check whether a question has been presented to them previously. And if it says that it has been, so if the true or false variable is set to true, it'll automatically move to the next question. That way, they're not going to get the same question twice in a row. So to see what that looks like in practice, let me just pop back over. Okay. So when I draw a card, okay, there's a few different triggers happening here. First up, there's a random number being generated between 1 and 6 when they click this. And based on what that random number is, it's going to go to the corresponding question. So if that random number ends up being 3, it'll jump to question 3. So if I pop down to question 3, here we go. You'll see that the first trigger the learner sees is, okay, as soon as the learner hits this slide, if question 3 answered is already equal to true, that means they've already seen this question. So just jump to the next slide, which would automatically be the next question. All right. And then you'll see what it's doing is it's adding a trigger there to set that question answered to true when it's done. So why is it doing this? Well, if this is the first time the learner's hit this slide, question 3 answered is going to be equal to false. So the storyline will look at this trigger and go, well, I can't do that because it's equal to false. And it will present the question. But at the same time, once it presents the question, it'll then also change it to true. All right, so that trigger is happening once this timeline starts. This is where trigger order becomes important. The minute this timeline opens, storyline needs to first do the check to see whether it's been presented previously. If it hasn't been, then it's going to now change it to say, yes, this has now been presented. But because it's doing it after this trigger, the question is still going to be presented to the learner. Okay. Whereas if it was set to, if this trigger was first, all right, if they hit that trigger first, the minute they hit the slide, it's going to set to true. Storyline will then automatically come down to the next trigger. And because we've already set it to true when they hit that slide, it's going to automatically go to the next question. So that's not going to help us. We want to make sure it presents the question first, if it's equal to false, then changes it to true. All right, so it's a little bit fiddly, but it's just kind of, again, thinking through, all right, if it's equal to false, then we do want to see the question. But once we've seen the question, we want to change it to true so that question doesn't get presented again. Does that make sense? Cool. All right. So ladies and gents, at 52 minutes, I've gone a little bit over time, so I do apologize for that. We've actually come to the end of our demo for today. The idea of today was really just to kind of show you what's possible and then give you that high level overview of how you could go about doing it. So if there's any questions, please throw them in the chat or the question bank now. All right, I'm happy to hang around for 5 minutes and answer them. If you need to race off, that's perfectly fine too. I do want to let you know if any of this is kind of got you keen and you're hungry to learn more about it, or you want to get deeper into it and learn about it, then we have what's called our Storyline Training Master Program. It's a virtual workshop. It's 3 sessions. Each session goes for 3 hours. We've got the next one coming up on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th of May. We've also got another one on the 5th, 6th, and 7th of July. What I'll do is I'll throw a link in the chat. If you're interested to have a look at it, then that is a great place to go to actually kind of do some more training around that idea of those more advanced skills. In fact, a number of the examples I shared with you in today's session, we actually give you those files as part of this training and take you through the step-by-step process on how to achieve those particular outcomes. So if you're keen to, if you're hungering for more, if you've done the basic and the advanced courses, or if you've been working in Storyline for a good 6 to 12 months, you're very, very comfortable with the building blocks, I'd really encourage you to check it out, have a look at it, stick a business case into the boss, say, hey, listen, here's some really good professional development, and that'll give you an opportunity to dig deeper into it. And yeah, great. Sue Ford, who's actually done the workshop, she's just mentioned in the chat that she highly recommends it. So that's good. Unsolicited. Awesome. Thank you, Sue. No worries, guys. So again, any questions, whack them in the chat or in the Q&A now. I'm happy to hang around and answer them. I'm also just going to whack through a few links in the chat. These are some great blog posts from our website, which kind of digs deeper into a lot of those ideas. So just grab a quick copy of those and paste it in a Word document somewhere or in a text document, and then you've got some further information you can dig into and have a bit of a play with. It looks at a lot of the ideas that we're playing with in this particular session. All right. So as I said, happy to hang around and answer any questions. Some good feedback in the chat. So thank you guys. Good to see what Storyline is capable of. So yeah, I'm happy to hang around for 5 minutes and answer any questions, but if not, that is the end of our session. So if you need to get back to work or you've reached the end of your lunchtime, I do thank you so much for hanging out with me for the last, half hour or so. Hopefully giving you a good opportunity for some nice inspiration, or at least kind of sparked a few ideas. And again, if you're keen to learn more, please check out our master training sessions. Thanks, guys. See you later. And I'll answer any questions that come through now.